Chapter 4, Murchie's ASP. The battalion warmed to the Wog Dog. Despite his sock-tearing pranks, he became a great favorite. His appetite amazed us. He always beat the bugle and ushered in mealtimes by a swift waddling from the tent to the cook-house. Even so, he was first on parade, too, especially the route marches. He marched proudly at the head of the column, his quaint little legs stepping out with the funniest imitation of a martial air, head and stumpy tail erect, chest forward, ears pricked. His keen eyes invited all the sundry to step out, step out. During a route march, the rebel section maneuvered to be in the leading platoon and keep an eye on the self-important Horrie. As he waddled along at the head of the column, he believed that everything should give him right away. But we were afraid of the busy trucks constantly tearing past. Horrie quickly learned to obey the rebels, but showed rebellious tendencies should any other soldier order him about. I first trained him to obey commands by aid of a fishing line tied to his collar, while he marched proudly ahead with a glance back at us for approval. Now and again I would order come alongside, then pull in the line until he came to heel. Very soon, at the order come alongside from any one of the rebels, he would immediately obey. We soon discarded the training string. His aptitude in grasping the meaning of anything required of him was uncanny. "He is the most intelligent member of the rebel section," growled Sergeant Popa, and he added as an afterthought, "certainly the most obedient. That's because he's learning all the old soldier tricks," laughed Fitz. "What you don't know, you cub," growled Sergeant Popa, "would fill a library of books." Horrie detested natives. Probably they had been cruel to him during his homeless days before he took to the desert. Where we were camped on the fringe of the western desert, there was nothing but our camp, sand and barren rock, and the occasional humble camp of the wandering Bedouin. These extremely poor but surprisingly proud children of the desert were not disliked by the Australian soldiers, as were the breeds that swarmed in the cities and their outskirts. We had to keep a sharp eye against the Bedouin on account of his expert thieving propensities, but apart from these, in this particular camp he never caused us any trouble. The Bedouin children were rather favorites, and very different to the cheeky, bakshish cadaging urchins of the city native quarters. But all native urchins were the same to Horrie. Fiercely he growled his protest when we ordered him not to chase them. He would fly at any grown Arab who approached within smelling distance of the camp. This made it safe for us to leave washing to dry on the tent ropes overnight, so long as the garments were out of Horrie's own reach. Prowling shades of the night soon learned to avoid our tent. During the long route marches, we would gratefully obey the occasional order to halt and smoko. At such times, Arab urchins would spring up from nowhere, vociferously selling us eggs a cook, watermelons, sweetmeats, and native lemonade, through with a weary ear on Horrie's growls of disapproval. These quick-witted little ragamuffins were shrewdly intelligent. A common trick of theirs was to say, deferentially, "Gib it baksheesh, sergeant," knowing that the sergeant was but a humble private. They were good-humored, surprisingly quick to grasp Australian slang phrases, and smart in picking up odd items of information which might help them in selling their wares. They had lent an attentive ear to the rules of hygiene that necessarily were so constantly drummed into the troops, while treating our idea of cleanliness with contemptuous mirth. They earnestly claimed their goods as very clean, very sweet, very hygiene, as they offered the fly-specked goods with grubby little hands that had never known a wash. One day a quick-witted little chap sold out his goods because of the roar of laughter he caused at Horrie's expense. With serious mien, Horrie took advantage of this particular smoko to make his toilet in view of all. As energetically he scratched sand over the result, the urchin shouted, "Very good, very sanitary," while another quick-witted youngster cashed in on the laughter by yelling, "Now, wouldn't it?" Horrie had an idea that the laughter was at his expense, and with a menacing growl turned on the urchins, and despite his size, caused a lively scatter. Big Jim led the platoon on a route march one day, and as we approached a small Arab village, he roared the order, "March to attention." All backs were straightened up, rifles slopped automatically, heads up, chins in, chest out to the rhythmic tramp of marching feet. Big Jim evidently wished to impress the natives, for as a rule we marched at ease, and yarned and walked all along pretty well anyhow. Dozens of Arab urchins flocked from the dwellings to gaze at the impressive sight. We were putting on a brave show with the wog dog, tail erect, marching in the lead, when right in the center of the village a tiny urchin shrilled, "March at ease," and the splendid sight collapsed to the laughter of the boys. "Sayada, good day," George called Murchy to the lad. His sharp little eyes took in Murchy's usual disreputable appearance, and instantly he shrieked, "Good day, Wog." Murchy was furious, the troops delighted. Any man could have bought a fight with Murchy if he had been game to say, "Sayada, Wog." Chapter 5. One Night in Alexandria. Horrie's education went on apace. He was such an eager pupil that the lads took pleasure in teaching him. His lively interest in everything was another trait in his character, which endeared him to us. Often, when the rebels were discussing some matter, he would squat quietly there, gazing up at our expressions, and catching every word, particularly when, during Sergeant Popa's absence, we would be plotting some dark deed against authority. Horrie's big brown eyes would fairly dance with delighted comprehension. Always eager to join in our escapades, we had but to whisper "Be quiet," and he would move silently as a mouse. He was fussily pleased with his little box bunk, and during the hot hours would recline in it while keeping one eye cocked towards the tent door. Nothing delighted him so much as to get in first with a greeting to any rebel entering the tent, or to rush out if he believed someone was threatening the rebels' possessions. Nights in Egypt were surprisingly cold, and Horrie discovered that the foot of my bed was warmer than his box. Shortly after lights out, when our conversation had ceased, he would snuggle on the bed, but the slightest movement would send him scuttling back to his box until I settled down again. Sometimes I'd strike a light and frown, and there was his little head poking from the edge of the box, innocence in the big brown eyes. He loved to accompany the inspection officer through the ranks during inspection parades, standing by with critical eye and knowing head as if detecting as keenly as the officer any shortcomings in the men's kits or untidiness among the tents. After inspection, he would take up his position in front of the platoon, facing the troops, for except on marches, he would not turn his back to the ranks. He was humanly downhearted by occasionally missing a parade. At the sound of marching feet, he would rush out barking for us to hurry and join in. But when we did not come, he would return on his own account, quite crestfallen, though understanding it was not the rebels' platoon that was marching. Next time, Horrie, I'd promise, and he'd wag his tail with brightening countenance, while enviously gazing after the platoon. One morning we received orders for a battalion parade. Our company formed up in platoons, preparatory to a preliminary inspection before moving off to the battalion parade ground. Corporal Feathers happened this morning to be in charge of our signal platoon. As usual, he was spick and span as a new pin, the smart, perfectly equipped soldier erect at the head of the platoon. Horrie was yelping excitedly, racing round and urging the platoon to move off, just as Big Jim came striding up to take command of our platoon. Another came marching by, and Horrie's excitement burst control. In the desert there are no trees where a dog can express his feelings, but Horrie's anguished eye lit on Feather's beautifully polished boots. In a second, he had dived up behind the immaculate soldier and, cocking his leg, made his salute in full view of the platoon, just as Feathers smartly saluted Big Jim. Even then the platoon might not have exploded had not a stray mongrel, noticing Horrie's mistake, dashed up and added his quota. The platoon burst into an uncontrollable roar of laughter. Feathers, quite unconscious of the comedy, turned about sharply and ordered quiet everywhere, every man firm as a rock. Fitz called out, "That's what Horrie thought, sir," and it took 10 minutes and a threat of 7 days CB to quieten the platoon. All the more tickled by the puzzled frown of Big Jim, who could not make out what had happened to his platoon on parade. Horrie meanwhile dashed to the head of the platoon, impatiently wagging his tail while awaiting the order to march. The little dog dearly liked a trip in a military truck, and would stand by the side of one asking for a ride. It was a good adventure for him to stand on the driver's seat, bark at the Arabs, and assault the dogs of Alexandria. By the way, it was in Alexandria that Murchie blotted the not-so-lily-white escutcheon of the rebels. I won't say we were on leave exactly, but anyway, we were there. Night, under the stars, the massed lights of Alexandria blinked upon the historic city. We strolled into a cafe where the red-fezzed orchestra was fairly drowned in the roar of voices. The lights were dim through clouds of tobacco smoke. New Zealanders, South Africans, British, Tommies, Free French, Aussies, Allied soldiers of many nationalities were all at their tables in lively enjoyment of precious hours of leave. As we sat down and ordered our drinks, I handed my hat to a waiter. "Hang this up too," said Murchie, and handed him something. A scream silenced the cafe as the waiter leaped back in ghastly fear from the ASP he had dropped. Murchie's little joke. The ASP wiggled, and the waiter screamed again and fell backwards over a table. That did it. There was a crash of glasses and foam of spilt beer, and the Tommies picked themselves up with howls of anguish. If you wish to arouse the British lion, just knock over his beer. They flew at us, and a brawl was in full swing. Tommies rushed to join Tommies. Aussies sprang to join Aussies, while Allied soldiers sprang up in noisy gesticulation. Overturned tables, upended waiters, a frantic orchestra, howls from the management, while a cosmopolitan mob gaped in from the street. Then concerted yells of "Coppers, coppers!" broke up the struggling groups, as all fought for the exits to escape the military police. "Not a bad start," panted Murchie, as we picked ourselves up out of the gutter. "We've only been in Alex 20 minutes." But a much more disturbing event happened back at camp. When nothing much was doing, Horrie was in the habit of wandering through the camp, visiting his numerous friends in the tents. One day he returned to us limping. We examined the leg that was worrying him, but could find nothing wrong. Later that day we were informed that Horrie had shot out of one particular tent with a yelp, the only occupant at that time being a particularly nasty piece of work, who unfortunately was able to shelter under 3 stripes. We could not understand any man who would seek to hurt Horrie, but this man was the only one in all that battalion who detested dogs. "I'm going to do him in," declared Murchie with an ugly look. He was striding towards the offending sergeant's tent, and would listen to none of us. "Look here, Murchie," I protested. "For goodness' sake, don't thump him, or we will lose Horrie. No dogs are allowed in camps, remember. We'll have to face a serious charge of assaulting a sergeant, and we won't have a leg to stand on. It will mean we will have to give the wog dog up." In frowning anger, Murchie hesitated. We talked it over and walked slowly back to the tent. The time came when the particular insect who had hurt the dog happened to be sergeant of the guard. It was a pitch-black night. One duty of the sergeant was to visit each post to see that all was in order. While on this tour of inspection, he was suddenly confronted by a muffled figure and challenging voice. "Who goes there?" "The sergeant of the guard." "Sergeant so-and-so?" inquired the figure. "Yes, cop this," and the sergeant was knocked to the ground. Next morning he sported a lovely pair of black eyes. Strenuous efforts were made to find the perpetrator of the dastardly deed, for the knocking of a sergeant of the guard was unheard of. A check-up of every tent was ordered, but all the rebels were in their tent at the time. Popa, the signal sergeant, was there to prove it. The offender was never brought to light despite the persevering attempts of the black-eyed sergeant. For some reason or other, he was certain one of the rebels was the culprit, but the dark crime faded into the limbo of unsolved mysteries. Chapter 6. Deep-laid plans. Like wildfire, the rumor spread. Something doing. There's a move on. No one knew how it originated. No one could obtain any verification or details. Any diplomatic approach to an officer brought a surprised lift of the eyebrows. No, he'd heard nothing about it, or he would shrug the matter away as just another rumor. But we noticed that the officers were taking a keen interest in life. It was about this time that the Gog got mixed up in an argument with a Gary in Alexandria. You cannot ignore a horse, Gary, and wild Egyptian driver, not when they're galloping all out. They took the Gog to hospital, where he bemoaned his luck in getting knocked just when a move was on. He declared he'd follow us up, even on crutches. After many rumors, the actions of Sergeant Papa first convinced us there really was something doing. In the temporary absence of Big Jim, he ran our particular little show. His enthusiasm in checking the signal gear and in bullying us for mislaying it was a sure sign something was doing, particularly as he was so mysterious about it all. Like a clucky old hen hatching eggs, grinned Gordy. It was a mistake when you were hatched, declared Popa. A better job than you, anyway, came back Gordy. You're only a bad egg, but we could not draw Popa, though we saw he was dying to spill the beans. We know all about it, anyway, declared Dawn. We are going home so you can lead the Anzac March through Melbourne. Too ancient, said Fitz pityingly. He'd never see the distance out. Neither of you will ever lead any march, snapped Popa. When you're my age, you'll be wheeled about in a bath chair. Popa don't need his bath chair, remarked Gordy. We've carried him a long way now, and it looks as if we've to keep on carrying him. When you've got to carry me, said Popa grimly, it will be in a box. Next thing was that Dawn and I were issued with 2 brand new motorcycles. While running and adjusting the engines, we eagerly discussed the certainty of a move. Wild guesses again swept the camp. Greece, Western Desert, but to the rebels' inquiries, Sergeant Popa still kept a stern silence, making an excuse that we were testing the new bikes. Dawn and I slipped away to Alexandria, and I wanted to buy some spools for the camera anyway. We entered a Greek shop, the proprietor of which spoke excellent English. Sorry, boys, he said, no spools, but you'll soon be able to buy plenty in Greece. We walked out quietly. The Greek knew more than we. As we rode back, we both were thinking about the Wog Dog. He must come with us, but how? He's solved it, declared Gordy, when we told him what the Greek had said. The weight of our gear has been assessed, and the boxes are measured in cubic feet. That points to a short sea trip. where space will be vital. Fitz voiced our thoughts. What about the Wog Dog? We were discussing the pros and cons when Popa entered the tent. He went straight to the Wog Dog, picked him up, sat on the edge of my bunk, and stroked him. Poor little Wog Dog, he said. We'll be sorry to leave you. Where we go, Horrie also goes, snapped Feathers. Popa put the dog down and grinned happily. I was wondering if you were slipping. That's all, he answered. You prehistoric worm, declared Murchie. If we leave anyone behind, it'll be you. Relax, grinned Popa. You'll get all the scrapping you want before long. So, the move is on, I inquired. It is, replied Popa, and lapsed into silence. Are you going to stay behind to mind the kit bags? Inquired Murchie sweetly. You'll take your own kit bags, snapped Popa, and I'll take you. We gazed at him in respectful silence. At last his weathered countenance wrinkled into a grin. Sergeant Popa had relented. Look here, he said confidentially. This is the news, but keep it under your hat. First of all, mail closes tomorrow at 1700 hours, so get your letters to the orderly room before 5 o'clock. The transport is going ahead the following day, and I suggest there might be room among their gear for something the size of a little Wog Dog. Don and Jim will probably take their machines and travel with the transport platoon. Good old Popa, the first stage of the problem was solved by that cunning old head. I'll trot over to the transport tent and chat to Ron Ford. I said. Ron was one of the drivers. I found the transport platoon busily writing letters home. 40 about, I inquired. He's down at the truck lines, answered Reg Jenks. Did you get the drill news? Yes, I hear you pull out the day after tomorrow. Yes, looks like Greece. That's the rebels' idea too, I replied, and located Ron Ford. We're in a spot, Ron, I explained. About Horrie. There's a good chance we could smuggle him away if only you could fit him in among the gear in your truck. Of course, agreed Ron. The battalion would never forgive you if you left the little dog behind. He can travel in the cabin of the truck, and I'll fix the windows so that he can't be seen. Thanks, Ron, and we arranged for such details as a tin of water and doggy meat for several days. We'd better put in a fair issue of water and meat, advised Ron. You see, the truck may be lowered down into the ship's hold, and I may not be able to get at it for a few days. Phew, I said. Horrie will be terrified. We've got to take risks, explained Ron. If the truck is lashed to the deck, then of course it'll be all right, but we don't know what will happen when we get to the wharf. I'll do my best. The Sarge tells us he may be able to detail Don and me to travel with you. If so, then one or the other of us will be able to watch where the truck is loaded aboard the ship and rescue Horrie if anything goes wrong. I returned to the tent and discussed the scheme with the rebels. All agreed that it appeared quite practical as long as Ron, the driver, Don, and I could work together with an eye on Horrie. Next morning came the first shock. Despite Popa's pulling of strings, Don and I received orders to load our machines on one of the trucks and travel with the signal platoon, not the transport platoon. The more we thought of it, the blacker it looked. The rebels held serious council. "Ron Ford will do all he can for the little wog dog," said Gordy. "But we know what happens when troops move. A man may be transferred to a different job at any time. I hate to think of the little wog dog, away down there in a dark hold, locked alone in the cabin of a truck," said Fitz. "We wouldn't forgive ourselves," said Murchy, "if the ship was torpedoed and we didn't get time to go down and give him his chance." That decided it. We agreed we must straightway work out another scheme. "We must get him aboard somehow," said Don. "Then he'll be all right." "No, he won't," cautioned Fitz. "Quarantine regulations are too strict. We still must hide him, or some of the crew might put him away." "They wouldn't do that," said Gordy. "Not in the main, they wouldn't, but some semi-officer bloke might spot him, and it might be more than his job was worth to keep quiet." "Get him aboard first," advised Gordy. "We'll solve the other problems as they come. Now he's such a tiny little chap that we could easily hide him in one of our kit bags." "A brainwave," declared Feathers. "It sometimes affects me that way," said Gordy modestly. "Yes," smiled Feathers, "though seldom in the right place. But let us work on this kit bag idea." "I wonder if he would keep quiet," I said. "If he should bark at a critical moment, he would put the show away." "We could hardly keep him in the bag for 2 or 3 days either. Don't forget he's got his own little arrangements to make." "I've got the right answer to that problem," declared Feathers. "It's about 2 days' travel from Alex to Greece, isn't it? About that, all going well. Well, counting Popa, we know that 6 of us rebels are detailed to travel together. We get the dog aboard somehow per kit bag. 6 of us will be together. 48 hours in 2 days. 6 into 48 goes 8, doesn't it?" "Marvelous," declared Murchy. "How well educated he's been," said Fitz admiringly. "He went through college on a bike," explained Murchy. "And thus," resumed Feathers, "we arrive at shifts of 8 hours. If your limited intelligence can grasp that simple mathematical calculation, now once aboard the ship, and we will scatter and search for a latrine. When located, we claim it speedy like. The rest is childishly simple. That latrine will be Horrie's suite. In it he can live in comfort and attend to his toilet as and when required. 1 man will stay with him throughout each 8 hours, each of the 6 taking turn about. Providing the caretaker has a book to read, the time will pass very pleasantly, the seating accommodation being all that is desired." "Marvelous," breathed Fitz. "Scrumptious," declared Gordy. "I'm for the first shift," claimed Feathers. "Don't move so fast," warned Murchy. "Wait till the proper time." "That'll be okay," grinned Feathers. "I'm regular." "It's a good idea anyway," said Don. "I'm relieved." "Not yet," grinned Feathers. "It's not your shift." "Oh, go and fry your face," replied Don. "The idea's good anyway." "Perfect," said Feathers, with a wave of the hand. "We can easily take his meal to the man sitting on shift. The scheme is perfect." "Yes, Solomon," broke in Murchy scathingly. "Only for one little point you've missed." "What's that?" demanded Feathers. "The latrine may not be a single-seater." This was a blow. We knew only too well the usual arrangements made aboard ships for troops, a rolling line of benches with seating accommodation for a troop of men, open to the world. There must be a single-seater somewhere aboard a ship. Declared Feathers, and we simply must find and commandeer it, even if it's the captain's. Well, we'll trust to luck about the single-seater, I suggested. Let us first educate the wog dog to the kit bag. I'm afraid he'll play up. By the way, where is he? Popa has him on duty guarding the signal gear to keep the wogs away, answered Gordy. I'll go get him, volunteered Murchie, and strode to the tent door. Better speak to him as you approach, called Feathers, or he'll mistake you for a wog. That's why you didn't offer to get him, came back Murchie's voice. He'd smell you a mile away. Murchie returned with Horrie and Popa. Fitz ordered Popa, you go and take over Horrie's place for a while. Oh, growled Fitz, it would be a poor show if any of your precious gear were pinched at this stage of the game. It would, snapped Popa. Go and guard that gear. Step lively. Oh, all right, growled Fitz. I suppose I've got to do what you can't do, and he growled his way out into the dark. Well, what's the new idea? Demanded Sergeant Popa. We told him. Well, he declared. So my patient teaching is bearing fruit at last. I was beginning to think you were hopeless. You've got nothing to think with, protested Murchie. An extra fatigue to you for that crack, replied Popa, amiably. And now, you poor nitwits, I'll run the rule over your plan. You couldn't improve it, declared Feathers. Nitwit, answered Popa scathingly. Paint on a cardboard, out of order, and tack it on the latrine door. We saw the point at once. The dear old man, said Murchie admiringly. Who'd ha' thought it? Not you, anyway, replied Popa. He was always such a stickler for privacy, grinned Murchie. I wasn't dragged up beside a hollow log, explained Popa. There's one snag, murmured Gordy. Well, what's it? Snapped Popa. If the latrine has gentleman painted upon it, then you won't be able to go in and do your shift. He'd ignore the notice, grinned Feathers, not knowing the meaning of the word. Get to work and educate Horrie to that kit bag, ordered Popa. I held the bag while Dawn introduced Horrie, stern first, into it. Horrie kicked a bit, but when I lowered the bag to the floor and his little hind legs found solid ground, he ceased kicking, standing on tiptoes in a comically desperate attempt to keep his head out of the bag. We can't shut the bag, said Gordy doubtfully, for if we pull the neck string tight, Horrie would smother. That means that we cannot carry the bag the usual way. Cut an air hole in the side of the bag, growled Popa. We did, and poked Horrie's bewildered head out of the hole. We can carry the bag now as usual, and Horrie won't choke, said Fitz proudly. Poor Horrie looked so comical we all laughed. Gratefully he gazed up at Popa as the old warrior patted his head. Never mind, Horrie, you'll soon take a tumble. It's you will soon be laughing at the nitwits here. When we let Horrie out of the bag, he shuffled shamefacedly to my bunk and, settling down, rested his chin on his leg and looked very miserable. The little chap is offended because we laughed at him, I said as I picked him up. Pretty smart dog, our Horrie flattered Popa, and soon, under the reassuring words, the little stubby tail was wagging again. At the second trial he entered the bag more willingly, though not actually liking it, but he seemed resolved. It was part of some new game he must play. We saw he would quickly learn every trick we could teach him. We considered the problem of getting him on board ship, unobserved, was now as good as settled. When once aboard, the locating of his suite must be left to quick wits and fate.